felt worse and worse. At last, I got up, dressed, and softly going down in my stockinged feet, sought out my stepmother and suddenly threw myself at her feet, beseeching her as a particular favor to give me a good slippering for my behavior. Anything indeed, but condemning me to lie abed such an unendurable length of time. But she was the best and most conscientious of stepmothers, and back I had to go to my room. For several hours I lay there, broad awake, feeling a great deal worse than I have ever done since, even from the greatest subsequent misfortunes. At last I must have fallen into a troubled nightmare of those, and slowly waking from it, half stepping in dreams, I opened my eyes, and the before sunlit room was now wrapped in outer darkness. Instantly I felt shock running through all my frame. Nothing was to be seen, and nothing was to be heard, but a supernatural hand seemed placed in mine. My arm hung over the counterpane, and the nameless, unimaginable silence for or form of a phantom, to which the hand belonged, seemed closely seated by my side. For what seemed ages, pale on eggs, I lay there, frozen with the most awful fears, not daring to draw away my hand, yet ever thinking that if I could but steer it one single inch, the horrid spell would be broken. I knew not how this consciousness at last glinted away from me, but waking in the morning, I suddenly remember it all, and for days and weeks and months afterwards, I lost myself in confounding attempts to explain the mystery. Nay, to this very hour, I often puzzle myself with it. Now, take away the awful fear, and my sensations at feeling the supernatural hand in mine were very similar in their strangeness to those which I experienced on waking up and seeing Quicke's pagan's arm thrown round me. But I let all the past nights even soberly recur, one by one, in fixed reality, and then I lay only alive to the comical predicament. For thought I tried to move his arm, unlock his bedroom room clasps. Yet, sleeping as he was, he still clutched me tightly. As thought now but death should part us twain. I now strove to rouse him quickly, but his only answer was a snore. I then rolled over my neck, feeling as if it were in a horse collar, and suddenly felt a slight scratch. Throwing aside the counterpane, there lay the tomahawk sleeping by the savage side, as if it were a hatchet-faced baby. A pretty pickle, truly thought I, a bed here in a strange house in broad day, with a cannibal and tomahawk. Quicket, in the name of goodness, quicket, awake! At length, by dint of much wriggling and loud and incessant expostulations, that matrimonial sort of style, I succeed in striking a grunt, and presently he drew back his arm, showed himself all over like a Newfoundland dog just from the water, and sat up in bed, stiff as pink staff, looking at me and rubbing his eyes as if he did not altogether remember how I came to be there. Thought a dim consciousness of knowing something about me seemed slowly dawning over him. Meanwhile, I lay quietly eyeing him, having no serious misgivings now, and bent upon narrowly observing so curious a creature, when at last his mind seemed made up touching the character of his bedfellow, and he became, as it were, reconciled to the fact. He jumped out upon the floor, and by certain signs and sounds gave me to understand that if it please me, he will dress first and then leave me to dress afterwards, leaving the whole apartment to myself. Thinks I, quicket under the circumstances. This is a very civilized overture, but the truth is, these savages have an innate sense of delicacy. Say what you will, it is marvelous how essentially polite they are. I pay this particular compliment to Quicket because he treated me with so much civility and consideration, while I was guilty of great rudeness, staring at him from the bed and watching out his toilet motions. For the time my curiosity getting the better of my breadwin. Nevertheless, a man like Quicket you don't see every day. He and his ways were well worth unusual regarding. He commenced dressing a top by doing his beaver hat a very tall one, by the by, and then, still minus his trousers, he counted his boots. What under the heaven he did it for, I cannot tell. But his next movement was to crush himself, boots in hand and head on, under the bed, when from sundry violent gasping and straining, I infer he was hard at work, booting himself. That by no law of propriety that I ever heard of is any man required to be private when putting on his boots, but Quicket, do you see, was a creature in the transition state, neither show off his outlandishness in the strange possible manner. His education was not yet completed. He was an undergraduate. If he had not been a small degree civilized, he very probably would not have troubled himself with boots at all. But then, if he had not been still savage, he never would have dreamed of getting under the bed to put them on. At last, he emerged with his hat very much dented, limping about the room as if it, not being much accustomed to boots, his pairs of damp, wrinkled cowhide ones, probably not made to order either, rather pinched and tormented him at the first go off of a bitter cold morning. Seeing now that there were no curtains to the windows, and that the street being very narrow, the house opposite commanded and plain view into the room, and observing more and more the indecorous figure that Quicket made staying about with little else but his hat and boots on, I begged him as well as I could to accelerate his toilet somewhat, and particularly to get into his pantaloons as soon as possible. He complied, and then proceeded to wash himself. At that time in the morning any Christian would have washed his face, but Quicket, to my amazement, contented himself with restricting his absolutions to his chest, arms, and hands. He then donned his waistcoat, and taking up a piece of hard soap on the washstand central table, dipped it into water, and commenced lathering his face. I was watching to see where he kept his razor with, when lo and behold, he takes the harpoon from the bed corners, slips out the long wooden stalk, unsheathes the head, wets it at the wall, begins a vigorous seraping or rather harpooning of his cheeks. Think I, Quicket, this is using Roger's best cutlery with a vengeance. Afterwards, I wondered the less at this operation when I came to know of what fine steel the head of a harpoon is made, and how exceedingly sharp the long straight edges are always kept. The rest of his toilet was soon achieved, and he proudly marched out of the room, wrapped up in his great pilot monkey jacket, and sporting his harpoon like a marshal's baton. Chapter 5. I quickly followed suit, and descending into the bar room accosted the grinning landlord very presently. I cherished no malice towards him, thought he had been skylarking with me not a little in the matter of my bedfellow. However, a good laugh is a mighty good thing, and rather to scarce a good thing. The more's the pity. So if any one man in his own proper person afford stop for a good joke to anybody, let him not be backward, but let him cheerfully allow himself to spend and be spent in that way. And the man that has anything bountifully laughable about him, be sure there is more in that man than you perhaps think for. The barroom was now full of the boarders who had been dropping in the night previous, and whom I had not as yet chief mates and second mates and third mates and sea carpenters and sea coopers and sea blacksmiths and harpooners and ship keepers, a brown and browny company, harpooners and ship with brosky birds and on shore shaggy set, all weary monkey jackets for morning grows. You should pretty plainly tell how long each one had been ashore. These young fellows' healthy cheek is like a sun mosque. He cannot have been 3 days landed from his Indian voyage. That man next him looks a few shades lighter. You might say a touch of satin wood is in him. In the complexion of a third still lingers a tropic town, but weeks ashore, but who show a cheek like cricket, which barbed with various tints seems like the Andes, western slope to show forth in one array, contrasting climates zones by zones. Group ho! Now cried the landlord, flinging open a door, and in went to breakfast. They say that men who have seen the world thoroughly become quite at ease in manner, quite self-possessed in company, not always thought. Ledyard, the great New England traveler, and Mungo Park, the Scotchman, of all men they possess the least assurance in the parlor. The perhaps the mere crossing of Siberia in a sledge run by dogs as Ledyard lead, or the taking a long solitary walk on an empty stomach in the Negro heart of Africa, which was some of the poor Mongols' performance. This kind of travel, I say, might not be the very best mode of attaining at a high social polish. Still, for the most part, that sort of thing is to be had anywhere. These reflections just here are occasioned by the circumstances that after we were all seated at the table, and I was preparing to hear some good stories about Walling, to my no small surprise, nearly every man maintained a profound silence, and not only that, but they looked embarrassed. Yes, here were a set of sea dogs, many of whom without the slightest bashfulness had worn great walls on the high seas, entire strangers to them, and duelled them dead without winking, and yet here they sat at a social breakfast table, all of the same column, all of pride and taste, looking round as sheepishly at each other as though they had never been out of sight of home's sheepfold among the Green Mountain. A curious sign, these bashful bears, these tamed warriors, wild men. But as for Quinquet, why Quinquet sat there among them, at the head of the table too, it so chanced, as cool as icicle. To be sure, I cannot say much for his breeding. His greatest admirer could not have currently justified his bringing his harpoon into breakfast with him, and using it there without ceremony, reaching over the table with it, to be the imminent jeopardy of many heads, and grapplings the beefsteaks towards him, but that was certainly very coolly done by him, and everyone knows that in the most people's estimation, to do anything coolly is to do it gently. We will not speak of Quilt's peculiarities here, how he swatched coffee and hot rolls and applied his undivided attention to beef steaks done rare enough that when breakfast was over he withdrew like the rest into the public room, lighted his tomahawk pipe, and was sitting there quietly digesting and smoking with his inseparable hat on, when I sailed out for a stroll. Chapter 6. If I had been astonished at first catching a glimpse of so outlandish an individual as Queen Ketch circulating among the polite society of a civilized town, that astonishment soon departed upon taking my first delight in stroll through the streets of New Bedford. In thoroughfares nigh the docks, any considerable sea sport will frequently over to view the queerest looking nondescript for foreign parts. Even in Broadway and Chattanooga Street, the deterrent mariners will sometimes jostle the affrighted ladies. Regent Street is not unknown to Lascars and Malays, and at Bombay, in the Apollo Green, live Yankees have often scared the natives. But New Bedford beats all Water Street and Wapping. In this last mentioned house you see only sailors, but in New Bedford all actual cannibals stand chatting at street's corner. Savages outright, many of whom yet carry on their bones unholy flesh. It makes a stranger stare, but besides the Fijians, Toga Tabors, Evromangons, Panagrans, and Bryans, and besides the wild specimens of the whaling craft which unheeded reel about the streets, you will see other signs still more curious, certainly more comical. There weekly arrive in his town scores of green Vermonters and New Hampshire men, all athirst for gain and glory in the fishery. They are mostly young, of stalwart frames, fellows who have felled forests and now seek to drop the axe and snatch the whalelands. Many are as green as the green mountains whence they came. In some things you would think them but a few hours old. Look there, that chap strutting round the corner. He wears a beaver hat and swallow-tail coat, girdled with a sailor belt and sheath knife. Here comes another with a sou'wester and a Bombay cloak. No town-bred dandy will compare with a country-bred one. I mean a downright bumpkin dandy, a fellow that in the dog days will mow his 2 acres in buckskin gloves for fear of tanning his hands. Now, when a country dandy like this takes into his head to make a distinguished reputation and joins the great whale fishery, you should see the comical things he does upon reaching the seaport. In bespeaking his sea outfit, he orders bell buttons to his waistcoats, straps to his canvas trousers. Ah, poor hayseed! How bitterly will burst those straps in the first howling gale, when thou art driving straps, buttons, and all down the throat of the tempest. But think not that this famous town has only harpooners, cannibals, and bumpkins to show her visitors. Not at all. Still, New Bedford is a queer place. Had it not been for us whalemen, that tract of land would this day perhaps have been in as hauling condition as the coast of Labrador. As it is, parts of her back country are enough to frighten one. They look so bunny. The town itself is perhaps the dearest place to live in. In all New England, it is a land of oil, true enough, but not like Canaan, a land also of corn and wine. The streets do not run with milk, nor in the springtime do they pave them with fresh eggs. Yet, in spite of this, nowhere in all America will you find more patricians-like houses, parks, and gardens more opulent than in New Bedford. Whence came they? How planted upon this once scratchy scoria of a country? Go and gaze upon the iron emblematic hall-plume round yonder lofty mansion, and your question will be answered. Yes, all these brave houses and flowery garden came from the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. One and all they were harpooned and dragged up hither from the bottom of the sea. Can her Alexander perform a feat like that? In New Bedford, fathers, they say, give walls for dowers to their daughters, and portions of their nieces with a few purposes of peace. You must go to the New Bedford to see a brilliant wedding, for they say they have reservoirs of oil in every house, and every night recklessly burn their lead in spermaceti candles. In summertime the town is sweet to see, full of fine maps, long avenues of green and gold, and in April, high in air, the beautiful and bountiful horse-chest nudes candelabra wise before the passer-by their tapering upright cones of congregated blossoms. So omnipotent is art, which in many a district of New Bedford has suffering rocks thrown aside a creation final day, and the women of New Bedford they bloom like their own red roses, but roses only bloom in summer. Wearily the fine carnation of their cheeks is perennial as sunlight in the seventh heaven. Elsewhere match that bloom of theirs, yet cannot save in Salem, where they tell me their young girls breathe such musk their ceaseless sweethearts smell them miles offshore, as thought they were drawing nigh the odorous Moluccas instead of the Puristanic sands. Chapter 7. In this same New Bedford there stands a Welshman chapel, and few are the moody fishermen, shortly bound for the Indian Ocean or Pacific, who fail to make a Sunday visit to spot. I am sure that I did not. Returning from my first morning stroll, I again sailed out upon the special errand. The sky had changed from clear, sunny cold to driving sleet and mist. Wrapping myself in my shaggy jacket on the cloth called bearskin, I fought my way against the stubborn storm. Entering, I found a small scattered congregation of sailors and sailors' wives and widows. A muffled silence reigned, only broken at times by the shrieks of the storm. Each silent worshipper seemed purposely sitting apart from the other, as if each silent grief were insular and incommunicable. The chaplain had not yet arrived, and there this silent island of men and women sat steadfastly, eyeing several marble tablets with black borders mashed into the wall on either side the pulpit. Three of them ran something like the following, but I do not pretend to quote. Shaking off the sleet from my eyeglass hat and jacket, I seated myself near the door and, turning sideways, was surprised to see Quicket near me. Affected by the solemnity of the scene, there was a wondering gaze of incredulous curiosity of his countenance. This savage was the only person present who seemed to notice my entrance, because he was the only one who could not read and therefore was not reading those frigid inscriptions of the wall. Whether any of the relatives of the seaman whose name appeared there were now among the congregation, I knew not, but so many are the on record accident in the fishery, and so plainly did several women present wear the countenance, if not the trappings, of some unceasing grief, in whose unhealing hearts the sight of those bleak tablets sympathetically caused the old wounds to bleed afresh. Oh, yeah, whose dead lie, buried beneath the green grass, who standing among flowers can say, Here Here lies my beloved. You know not the desolation that brews in bosom like this. What bitter blanks in those blackboard marbles which cover no ashes? What despair in those immobile inscriptions? What deadly blots I unbidden infinitely in the lines that seem to nave upon all faith, and refuse resurrections to the beings of have pleasantly perished without a grave? As well might those tablets stand in the cave